My name is Margarita Louise Carter, and I turned 60 last spring. By the time you reach my age, you think you've seen it all: pain, betrayal, love, miracles. But life has a way of showing you there's always one more surprise waiting just around the corner. I still remember that morning like it was stitched into the back of my eyelids. The sound of the vacuum cleaner hummed through the marble hallway of Whitmore & Sons Enterprises, the company where I worked as a cleaner for 22 years. I wore my usual blue uniform, faded at the edges, my name tag hanging by a single thread. Most days I was invisible to them, the executives in their sharp suits, the secretaries with their heels clicking across the floor like ticking clocks. That day, though, was different. I had come early, earlier than usual. The sunlight spilled through the wide glass windows, painting gold streaks across the polished floor. My reflection in the glass didn't look like a cleaner anymore. It looked like a woman who had waited too long to take what she deserved. You see, I wasn't always a cleaner. I once had dreams too, but life, and a man I trusted, took those dreams, chewed them up, and spat them out. After my husband, Clarence, left me for a woman half my age, I had nothing. No house, no car, no savings, just my hands and a broom. People at Whitmore never knew my story. They saw the uniform and thought that's all there was to me. Sometimes I'd hear them talk as I wiped down the conference table. "She's been here forever," one would say. "She'll probably retire cleaning floors," another would laugh. And I'd just smile, because deep down, I knew something they didn't. It started 10 years ago with a coffee stain. One morning, the company's CFO spilled his latte on a stack of reports. He cursed, stomped off, and left the mess behind. When I picked up those papers to clean the table, I saw numbers, lots of them, but one figure caught my eye: a missing $2.3 million. Now, I might have been a cleaner, but I wasn't stupid. I'd spent years balancing my household budget, raising 3 kids, and surviving on pennies. Numbers made sense to me. So I copied those figures down on an old receipt, stuffed it in my pocket, and started watching. For months, I observed everything: who came in early, who stayed late, who looked nervous during meetings. I learned that the CFO, Mr. Douglas, had been laundering company money into shell accounts overseas. But instead of reporting it, I waited. I cleaned his office, dusted his awards, and smiled while he ignored me, because I had a plan. I started investing quietly. Every paycheck, I took a small portion, $20 here, $50 there, and put it into a mutual fund. Then, when I found out the company's stock was about to skyrocket after a merger, I bought in, all of it. Years passed, and no one suspected a thing. Then, 2 weeks ago, the board announced Douglas's sudden resignation. They had found discrepancies, the very ones I had once wiped coffee off of. That's when I got the call. A young lawyer, sharp voice, polite tone. "Mrs. Carter, we've been reviewing some internal records, and your name appears in relation to several investment holdings. Are you aware that you now own a controlling share of Whitmore & Sons?" I nearly dropped the phone. So this morning, when I walked into the building, I wasn't the cleaner anymore. I was the owner. But nobody knew that yet. As I wheeled my cleaning cart past the executive lounge, I heard the familiar laughter, Mr. Douglas's replacement and his assistant joking about how the old cleaner still shows up early. I smiled, because in an hour, I'd be sitting across from them in the boardroom, signing papers that would make me their boss. I paused in front of the mirror in the restroom, adjusted my cap, and whispered to my reflection. They thought I was beneath them, but today, I signed the paycheck. And for the first time in decades, I stood tall, not as the woman they ignored, but as the woman they never saw coming. Before I ever held a pen to sign my own paycheck, I held a mop. Before that, I held my baby's. And before that, I held my mother's hands, rough, cracked, but strong enough to lift the world. I was born in 1965 in Jackson, Mississippi, when the air still carried the dust of marches and the smoke of burning crosses. My mama, Evelyn Carter, was a maid all her life. My daddy, Thomas, worked construction until a steel beam took his leg and his pride. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and faith that somehow, someday, things would get better. Mama used to tell me, Margarita, ain't no shame in cleaning floors. The shame is letting your mind stay dirty. I never forgot that. When I was 12, I'd come home from school and help Mama scrub the church floors. I used to hum gospel songs while wringing out the mop, my hands smelling of bleach and lemon. She'd smile and say, "Keep singing, baby. One day you'll be cleaning your own floor in your own house." She didn't know how right she'd be, or how long that road would take. At 17, I left home with dreams too big for our small town. I went to Chicago with a scholarship to study accounting. I thought I'd made it, me, the maid's daughter, walking through the doors of a university. But life doesn't hand you blessings without testing your backbone first. My first semester, my mama passed away. Stroke, they said. Stress and too many years scrubbing other people's dirt. I couldn't afford to go back home, so I worked nights at a diner and sent what I could for the funeral. That's when I met Clarence. He was tall, smooth, a dreamer like me, or so I thought. He had a smile that made me forget to breathe and a voice that sounded like promises. We married 2 years later, and by 25, I was a mother of 3 and a college dropout. Clarence said he'd take care of us, but the truth was, he took care of himself. Jobs came and went, bills stacked up like old newspapers. I found work as a cleaner for Whitmore and Sons, just until things got better. But things didn't get better. I still remember the day Clarence left. It was raining, the roof leaked, the kids were crying, and the only thing louder than the thunder was his suitcase zipper. He said, "I can't live like this anymore, Margarita." I asked, "Like what?" He looked at me, at my worn uniform, my tired eyes, and said, "Like this, with someone who doesn't dream anymore." He walked out and never looked back. That night, I sat on the kitchen floor and cried until I couldn't feel my face. But then I looked up at the calendar on the wall. My youngest's birthday was 3 days away. I wiped my tears, pulled myself up, and went to work the next morning, because life doesn't stop when your heart breaks, especially when little mouths are waiting to be fed. Those years turned me into steel. I learned to stretch $1 into 3. I learned that pride can't buy groceries, but discipline can change everything. And most of all, I learned that people who look down on you will never see how high you're building. At work, I started watching, not just cleaning. I learned how companies breathe, how power moves through hallways, how people hide greed behind smiles. Every night, while scrubbing the CEO's office, I'd glance at the reports left on his desk, the charts, the graphs. I couldn't read all of it back then, but I remembered. I studied. I taught myself accounting again, quietly, at home, after putting the kids to bed. It took me 10 years to pay off debt, another 10 to send all 3 of my children to college. I thought that would be my greatest victory. But fate, or maybe God, had one more twist waiting for me. One evening, after everyone left the office, I stayed behind to finish cleaning the boardroom. The CFO had left his laptop open. I don't know what made me look, maybe curiosity, maybe instinct, but what I saw was theft dressed in numbers. That's when I realized the company I had served for decades was rotting from the inside. And that was the night the cleaner stopped being just a cleaner. When you've spent 30 years cleaning up after powerful men, you learn that dirt doesn't always live on the floor. Most of it hides in their spreadsheets. That night, standing in the dim light of the boardroom, I saw the first glimpse of the truth. The numbers on that screen weren't just numbers, they were fingerprints. Every line, every expense, every consulting fee whispered corruption. I didn't understand all of it yet, but I understood enough. They were stealing from the very company I kept spotless. I didn't panic. I closed the laptop carefully, wiped away my fingerprints, old habits, and finished mopping the floor like nothing happened. But inside, something had changed. For years, I'd been invisible, the woman who appeared before dawn and disappeared after dusk, the one they didn't look at twice. But now, I had eyes wide open. I started to notice who laughed too loud in meetings, who carried new watches every week, who slipped envelopes across desks. I cleaned their offices, but I also listened. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise as usual. I put on my uniform, packed my lunch, and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection looked the same, tired eyes, gray in curls tucked under a scarf, but I felt different. It was like Mama's voice whispered through the glass. Don't just wipe away their mess, baby. Learn from it. So I did. Every night after work, I'd open my old laptop at the kitchen table. My daughter, Denise, had left her college textbooks in her old room. I started reading them. Accounting principles, business management, investments for beginners. At first, I barely understood a thing, but I kept at it. I studied while the kettle whistled. I wrote notes while laundry spun. The woman who once scrubbed floors now learned how to read financial statements. I didn't sleep much, but knowledge became my caffeine. Months passed. I discovered how Whitmore & Sons moved money into shell accounts, how bonuses were inflated, how workers' retirement funds were being drained quietly. But instead of going to the police, I took another route. If there's one thing life had taught me, it's this. When people see you as powerless, that's your camouflage. So I kept quiet and started to plan. Whitmore had one thing they didn't guard well: their stock purchase program. Employees could buy small shares from their paychecks. Most cleaners never bothered. Who had extra money? But I started buying one share at a time. One share became 10, 10 became 50, 50 became 1,000. I lived small. No new clothes, no eating out, no vacations. Every spare dollar went into those shares. And as I grew my little piece of the company, I grew my knowledge of how it worked. In the meantime, I built allies in quiet places. The night guard, the mail clerk, even a junior accountant named Travis who always stayed late. He was young, ambitious, but naive. I brought him homemade cornbread one night and asked innocent questions. "Travis, baby, how y'all calculate these dividends again?" He smiled and explained everything like a teacher. Poor child didn't know he was tutoring the woman who'd one day own part of his boss's empire. Then came the meeting. It was a Friday afternoon when Mr. Whitmore himself called everyone in. He strutted into the room with his diamond cufflinks flashing, talking about budget cuts. And when rich men say budget cuts, it's always the poor folks who bleed first. He said, "We're outsourcing our janitorial staff to cut costs." Just like that, 30 of us, me, my coworkers, friends who had given their lives to that building, were told our jobs were gone. I didn't say a word. I nodded politely, gathered my things, and left. On the bus home, I didn't cry. I just stared out the window, watching the city blur. I'd cleaned those windows for half my life, and now I could finally see through them. For the first time in years, I slept in. No alarm clock, no mop, no uniform, just silence. But it wasn't peace. It was the quiet before transformation. I took my severance pay, cashed out my small investments, and used every cent to start something new: Carter's Cleaning Services. Named after my mama, Evelyn Carter, the woman who taught me dignity in every drop of sweat. At first, it was just me and an old van I bought at auction. I scrubbed houses, offices, schools, anything that paid. But I didn't stop there. I learned about business licenses, contracts, insurance, and scaling. By the second year, I had 3 employees. By the third, I had 20. We weren't just cleaners, we were professionals. My uniforms were crisp, my vans spotless, my services reliable. I made sure every woman who worked for me earned fair pay and respect, because I'd lived the opposite, and I wouldn't let it happen again. Then one day, while I was meeting a new corporate client, I saw a name on the contract proposal: Whitmore & Sons. Oh, Lord, I almost laughed. They were outsourcing their cleaning again, and now my company was one of the bidders. I walked into that glass building wearing a tailored navy suit and pearls. My curls were free, my chin high. When I entered the conference room, one of the executives frowned. "Mrs. Carter, haven't we met before?" I smiled. "I used to work here," I said. "You might have seen me after hours." They didn't recognize the cleaner in me anymore. Only the woman sitting across the table, confident, composed, signing the papers. A week later, the contract was mine. The first day my team arrived at Whitmore and Sons under my company name, I walked in behind them. The same marble floors, the same offices, but everything felt different. I wasn't carrying a mop this time. I was carrying a clipboard and authority. As I passed the CEO's office, I stopped for a moment, looking through the glass at his desk. He was still there, graying now, reading reports, unaware of the woman who had once scrubbed his floors. I smiled and whispered to myself. I was the cleaner at their company until I signed the paycheck. Then I walked away. From there, life unfolded like a new sunrise. Carter's cleaning services grew across 3 states. I started hiring single mothers, older women, even ex-convicts, folks society overlooked, just like they once overlooked me. We trained them, uplifted them, gave them benefits, because I remembered what it felt like to have someone look through you like you were part of the furniture. Now, every contract I signed, every building I entered, was a small act of redemption. Not just for me, but for every woman who had ever been underestimated. Sometimes I still visit Mama's old church. I kneel in the same aisle she once mopped and whisper, "You were right, Mama. I do clean my own floors now, and a whole lot more." Success has a strange way of calling back the ghosts you thought you buried. 3 years after winning the Whitmore contract, Carter's cleaning services had grown beyond anything I imagined. We cleaned banks, law firms, hospitals, even a few government offices. I had 40 employees now, mostly women who came from the same broken paths I once walked. But with every floor we polished, there was always someone waiting to make it dirty again. It started small, a late payment here, a lost invoice there. Then came rumors. Carter's staff left a mess. Carter's broke a client's property. Lies, spread quietly but strategically. I knew how corporate whispers worked. I used to mop around them. Then one morning, I got the call that nearly broke my calm. "Mrs. Carter, this is Whitmore and Sons accounting department. We're terminating our contract effective immediately." No explanation, no meeting, just click. I sat there in my office, sunlight pouring through blinds, my coffee gone cold, feeling the ground shift under me. That contract had been my biggest. Losing it meant losing almost half my revenue. But I wasn't the same woman who used to bow her head and accept what came. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. 2 days later, I walked into Whitmore and Sons again, this time not as a cleaner, not even as a contractor, but as a businesswoman defending her company's name. The boardroom was full. Mr. Whitmore himself, his new CFO, and a few of those same executives who once ignored me in the hallways. Mr. Whitmore looked at me over his glasses. "Mrs. Carter," he said, voice smooth as silk, "we've received multiple complaints about your company's quality. I'm afraid our partnership is no longer sustainable." I leaned forward, calm and deliberate. "Do you have written reports of those complaints?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "Well, not formally." I smiled. "Then allow me to show you something formal." I opened my folder, sliding a stack of documents across the table, photos, attendance logs, and digital records from our time tracking app. Every task, every shift, every spotless inspection signed by their own supervisors. Silence. Then I added one more sheet, a printed email chain. "Your CFO here," I said, nodding toward a pale man at the end of the table, "has been communicating with one of my competitors. It appears he offered them my contract before mine was even canceled." Whitmore's jaw tightened. The CFO turned ghost white. I let the moment breathe. Then, softly, I used to clean this room. I know where the dirt hides. The meeting ended fast. They reinstated my contract and doubled it. But I walked out knowing this wasn't over. Powerful men don't forget the woman who made them look small. That night, at home, I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching the sun sink low behind the trees. The air smelled like magnolias and rain. My daughter Denise came out, resting her hand on my shoulder. "Mama," she said, "you always find a way to land on your feet." I chuckled. "Baby, that's 'cause I learned to build wings while falling." But inside, I was thinking ahead. I'd fought too hard to let anyone pull me down again. So I took a risk. I expanded, not just cleaning, but property maintenance, landscaping, even building management. My staff learned new skills, and my contracts grew broader. I partnered with minority-owned suppliers and started mentoring young women who dreamed of business. And that's when he appeared. Richard Daniels, a corporate consultant with a smooth voice and eyes that studied people like puzzles. He approached me at a local business gala. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I've heard a lot about you. I'd like to help you take Carter's services national." I didn't trust him right away. Years of experience had sharpened my instincts, but something about his quiet confidence made me pause. He wasn't trying to talk over me like most men in suits. He listened. We began working together. He taught me about contracts, franchises, and investors. I taught him about grit. We were an odd pair, a 60-year-old black woman and a middle-aged consultant with a past he didn't talk about. But together, we built something powerful. Still, trust didn't come easy. One night, over dinner, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I've been betrayed by people who smiled while stabbing. You should know, I check what's behind every handshake." He smiled, raising his glass. "Then I'll make sure to keep my hands visible." Months later, the company crossed a milestone, our first $1 million contract. The day I signed it, I sat alone in my office afterward, the same kind of small desk I'd once polished for others, and whispered, "Mama, we did it." But just as I allowed myself that quiet joy, another email arrived. Anonymous. Short. "They're planning something again. Check your books." No name, no signature, but I knew that tone. I heard it before, hidden in boardrooms and whispers. The next few nights, I went through every ledger, every payment, every account, and that's when I saw it. Small discrepancies, hidden like dust under a rug. Someone was moving money through my business. Not much, but enough to sting. And when I traced it far enough, my heart went cold. The trail didn't lead to an outsider. It led straight to Richard Daniels. I didn't want to believe it. When I first saw Richard's name tied to those false transactions, I told myself there had to be an explanation, a clerical error, a mistake in my software, something. Because Richard wasn't just my business partner anymore. Over late-night strategy calls and shared victories, he'd become something more tender, more dangerous, someone I had started to trust. Trust, for me, was no small thing. It was sacred. I'd built my empire brick by brick from the ruins of broken promises. So before judgment, I needed truth. I invited Richard to dinner, my home, my kitchen, the heart of where every real test in my life had begun. The table was set simply: roasted chicken, sweet potatoes, and collard greens, my mother's recipes. He came in smiling, his charm smooth as honey. "Margarita," he said, taking off his coat, "this smells incredible." I smiled back. So does deceit when it's dressed right. His smile faltered, just slightly. We ate in silence for a while. I let him talk about contracts, expansion, and upcoming clients. Then, mid-sentence, I set down my fork and slid a folder across the table. Inside, copies of the invoices, the account transfers, and one particularly damning document with his digital signature. "Explain this to me, Richard," I said quietly, "before I decide whether I'm feeding my friend or my thief." He stared at the papers for a long moment. His hands didn't shake, but his eyes did something worse. They went flat, cold, calculating. "Margarita," he said finally, "you have to understand, this isn't what it looks like." I raised an eyebrow. "So it's not theft?" "It's a strategy." He leaned forward. "I moved some funds into a temporary account to secure a deal you weren't supposed to know yet." I studied his face. "And what kind of deal requires my money and your secrecy?" He exhaled sharply. "I was going to buy out a competing firm in your name. You'd double your profits. But if I told you, you'd panic." For a moment, I almost wanted to believe him. That old version of me, the one who believed good intentions could erase bad actions, whispered, maybe he meant well. But then I remembered all the nights I'd counted pennies, all the times I'd been lied to by smiling men in polished shoes. I leaned back. "You know the difference between strategy and stealing, Richard?" He didn't answer. "It's permission." The next morning, before the sun even touched the sky, I called my lawyer. By noon, the accounts were frozen. By evening, the contracts Richard had access to were reassigned. He didn't see it coming. When I finally told him his role was terminated, he just stood there in my office, the same office he once helped me design, looking small for the first time. "I thought we were building this together," he said. I looked him straight in the eye. "We were, until you started building secret rooms behind my walls." That night, after everyone left, I sat in my empty office. The silence was heavy, not sad, but solid, like a wall built to protect something precious. Outside, the city lights blinked like tiny truths. I realized then, every person who had ever betrayed me had taught me something about my own strength. I opened my journal, the one I'd kept since my first day cleaning offices, and wrote, "They mistook kindness for weakness again, but I don't break, I rebuild." Weeks passed. I rebuilt my trust from the ground up. Richard's exit caused a stir, but Carter's services stood firm. Clients stayed. My employees, my women, stood taller than ever. One afternoon, I held a team meeting in our new headquarters, a sleek building overlooking downtown. As I spoke, I saw pride in their eyes. Women who once whispered about unpaid bills were now leading teams, signing contracts, mentoring others. This company, I told them, was never about floors or glass. It's about second chances. And this time, we clean the world, not just its buildings. The room erupted in applause. That night, alone at home, I received a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a check, Richard Daniels. Amount, the exact total of what he'd taken. No note, no apology, just repayment. I smiled faintly. Justice, in silence, is still justice. I took that check, deposited it the next day, and then donated every cent to a women's shelter under my mother's name. Because power isn't about holding grudges. It's about choosing what to do when the world finally gives you the upper hand. As I left the bank, a young teller smiled shyly. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "my mom used to work for you. She said you changed her life." I paused, tears threatening but held firm. "I didn't change it," I said softly. "I just handed her the broom. She did the cleaning herself." And as I walked out into the late afternoon sun, the glass doors reflected me, a 60-year-old Black woman who had mopped floors, faced betrayal, and built an empire, one truth at a time. The next chapter of my life didn't begin with applause or headlines. It began with silence, the kind of silence that comes after you've proven your worth to the world, and now you have to decide what to do with that power. For months after Richard's departure, the company thrived. New contracts, new staff, new opportunities. But inside me, there was a restlessness, a whisper that said, "Margarita, you've climbed the mountain. Now build a bridge for others to follow." It started one rainy morning in April. I was driving past Jefferson High, my old school, the one I left at 16 to take my first cleaning job. The bricks were faded now, the paint peeling, but I still remembered that girl who'd walked out those doors, carrying a mop instead of a diploma. I parked my car and sat for a long time, staring at the building. Then I took out my phone and made a call that would change everything. "Good morning," I said when the principal answered. "This is Margarita Carter. I'd like to start a scholarship program for young women who don't see their worth yet." By summer, the Carter Foundation for Women in Work was born. We began small, 5 students, each with a story that broke and mended my heart at the same time. One had been living in her car, saving every penny to finish community college. Another was raising 2 kids while studying accounting online. I saw myself in all of them, not because of our struggles, but because of our hunger. During our first meeting, I told them, "I can pay for your education, but that's not the real gift. The real gift is permission to dream without apologizing." They cried. I did too. But success attracts shadows. A month after the foundation's announcement, an article appeared online. The cleaner turned millionaire, or just another PR story. It accused me of using charity to hide tax strategies, hinted that my rise was too good to be true. I should have been used to it by now, the disbelief, the jealousy, but reading those words still stung. That night, I sat in my kitchen again, the same spot where I'd once confronted Richard. The city was quiet outside. Then, like always, I got up, brewed some coffee, and got back to work. Because every time someone doubted me, I built something bigger. The next morning, I called my assistant. "Book a press conference," I said. "If they want to question my motives, I'll show them my numbers." The conference hall filled fast, cameras, reporters, curious faces. I stepped up to the podium in my gray suit, not designer, but dignified, and said, "People think cleaning is about wiping away dirt. It's not. It's about seeing what's underneath, the truth. So here's mine." I displayed the foundation's full financials, every donation, every expense, every name of every student supported. Then I looked straight into the cameras and added, "You can question how I started, but you can't question what I've built, because every check I write is proof that women like me don't need permission to lead. We just need a chance." The applause started small, then it grew, filling the room like thunder. Months later, I was invited to speak at a National Women's Summit in Washington. Standing backstage, I could hear the host introducing me. From cleaner to CEO, Margarita Carter reminds us that no beginning is too humble and no dream too far. As I stepped on stage, I saw hundreds of faces, young, old, hopeful, tired, all looking up, waiting. I told them about the mop, the betrayal, the keys to the mansion, the foundation. But more than that, I told them this: the world will try to tell you that you're too late, too poor, too broken, too small. But every woman in this room was born with something greater than luck. We were born with grit, and grit doesn't ask for an invitation. When I finished, they stood, not for me, but for themselves. Back home that evening, my daughter came over. She brought her little boy, my grandson, who ran through the house laughing. "Mama," she said softly, "I watched your speech. You were incredible." I smiled. I just told the truth. She hesitated. "You know, when I was younger, I didn't understand why you worked so hard, why you never accepted help. But now I see you weren't just surviving, you were teaching." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Baby, the best lessons ain't spoken, they're lived." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I walked into my office and turned off the lights. Through the glass walls, the city shimmered. The same city that once ignored me, now shining because I refused to disappear. I looked at the cleaning staff below, their blue uniforms moving quietly through the halls. One of them noticed me and waved. I waved back, smiling. Because that was where it all began, with a broom, a bucket, and a belief that dignity isn't about position, it's about purpose. And as I stood there, the air heavy with the scent of polish and possibility, I whispered to myself, this isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of the legacy. When I was younger, I used to think wealth was measured by what you could touch, the house, the car, the gold. But at 60, I finally understood real wealth is what grows after you're gone. That's why I started looking beyond myself, beyond my story. The Carter Foundation had already helped dozens of women, but one girl in particular stayed in my heart. Her name was Leah Williams. Leah reminded me of me, except she was fiercer, sharper, and braver than I'd ever been at her age. She walked into my office one day with fire in her eyes and a folder in her hand. "Ms. Carter," she said, "I want to apply for your scholarship, but I'm not asking for a handout. I want a partner." A partner? I liked the sound of that. "Sit down, baby," I said, smiling. "Tell me your story." She took a deep breath. "I grew up in South Baltimore. My mama cleaned offices at night, my daddy worked at the shipyard. When the pandemic hit, they both lost their jobs. I started fixing broken phones to keep the lights on. Now I want to open my own repair business, hire other young women who need a chance like me." Her words hit me like a memory I'd been trying to forget, that same hunger, that same refusal to break. I leaned back in my chair. "You remind me of myself at your age." She raised an eyebrow. "Did you ever think you'd be sitting in this kind of office, Ms. Carter?" I chuckled. "Baby, I didn't even think I'd have an office. I just wanted a day off without worrying about rent." We laughed together. 2 generations connected by struggle, but also by something stronger, possibility. I gave Leah the grant that day. But more than money, I gave her time. Every week, she'd come by my house after her classes, and we'd talk about business, about life, about fear. One evening, she asked, "Ms. Carter, were you ever scared? You talk like you always knew what to do." I smiled, pouring tea into our cups. "I was scared every damn day, baby. But fear is a kind of fuel. You just have to make sure it drives you forward, not backwards." She nodded, writing that down in her notebook. "Fear drives you forward," she repeated quietly. 6 months later, she called me with excitement crackling through the phone. "Ms. Carter, I did it. I opened my shop." I laughed out loud. "What'd you call it?" She paused, giggling. "Clean Start Repairs, after your story." That name, Lord, it did something to me. When I drove down to see it, the shop was small but bright. 3 young women worked behind the counter, smiling, soldering, fixing cracked screens. On the wall hung a photo of me mopping floors at Jefferson Building, back in my uniform. Above it, a sign read, "From cleaner to CEO, proof that every start is worth it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my porch with my tea, listening to the quiet hum of the city. I realized that for the first time in decades, I wasn't working for survival. I was living for legacy. The seeds I'd planted were growing. Leah was just the first. The next year, there were 10 like her, then 50, then hundreds. Each one had a story. Each one had grit. But not everyone liked my influence spreading. Big investors, mostly men who once ignored me, started approaching Leah, offering her deals that sounded too good to be true. She called me one night, worried. "They want me to sell half the company, Miss Carter. They say they can scale me faster, make me global." I asked, "And what do you want?" She hesitated. "I want to grow, but I don't want to lose myself." "Then, baby," I said, "don't sell your soul just to buy speed. Remember, slow growth builds roots. Fast money blows away with the wind." She took my advice. And a year later, Clean Start Repairs expanded, not through investors, but through community partnerships. When Leah was featured on national news, she called me crying. "They said I built this company from nothing," she sobbed. I smiled through tears. "That's what they always say, baby. But we both know, nothing grows from nothing." At the Foundation's annual gala that year, Leah gave a speech. The room was filled with powerful people, CEOs, senators, activists. She walked on stage, her voice steady but strong. I wouldn't be here without a woman who believed a cleaner could become a CEO. Ms. Margarita Carter taught me that power isn't about control, it's about creation. She showed me that when a woman rises, she doesn't climb alone. She lifts the world with her. The audience stood. The applause felt endless. I wiped a tear from my eye, whispering, "Lord, I didn't think I'd live to see my harvest." Later that night, Leah found me. She hugged me tight and said, "You planted seeds, Miss Carter, and now we're the forest." I couldn't speak. I just held her hand, feeling the truth in her words. Because that's what I'd always wanted. Not fame, not fortune, but continuity. When I went home that night, I sat at my desk and opened my old notebook, the one I used when I cleaned offices and dreamed of something more. I wrote one final line at the bottom of the page. The cleaner built a legacy, not with money, but with belief. And for the first time in my life, I closed the notebook, not out of surrender, but out of peace. There's a truth nobody warns you about when you get older. Success doesn't make your body any stronger. You can sign checks worth millions, but you still wake up one morning and realize your hands tremble when you pour your coffee. That morning came for me in late spring. The sun was bright, the birds loud, and yet, when I reached for my cup, it slipped. The sound of it shattering on the kitchen tile was louder than it should have been. I stared at the spilled coffee, dark and spreading, and I knew something inside me had changed. I went to see Dr. Lawson, my physician, a kind, gray-haired man who'd known me since I worked at Jefferson. He looked at the scans quietly, his brow furrowing. "Margarita," he said gently, "your heart's showing signs of strain. Nothing dramatic, but you need rest, real rest." I laughed softly. "Rest? You tell a woman who's been working since she was 14 to rest, and she won't even know what that means." He smiled kindly. "Then it's time you learned." For the first time in 46 years, I didn't go to work the next day. I sat on my porch, watching the street, listening to the rhythm of the world go on without me. At first, I felt useless. The foundation ran fine without my voice in every meeting. The staff managed themselves. Leah had taken over half the operations. They didn't need me the way they used to. That realization hit hard, harder than any heartbreak. But as the days passed, something else bloomed in that silence, a strange peace. I had built something that could live without me. Maybe that was the real goal all along. One afternoon, Leah came by with flowers. "You look beautiful, Ms. Carter," she said, placing a bouquet of tulips on my table. I chuckled. "You always lie pretty." She grinned, shaking her head. "No, I mean it. You look softer, lighter." I sighed. Maybe because I finally put down the broom I've been carrying all my life, even after I stopped cleaning floors. She sat beside me. "You taught me to build something I could be proud of, but I never asked, what are you proudest of?" That question stopped me. I thought about the houses, the foundation, the awards, the newspaper articles, but none of it felt right. I looked at her and said, "You, baby. You and every woman who believed she could be more than what the world told her to be, that's what I'm proud of." As the months rolled by, I found joy in smaller things. I took long walks in the park. I started journaling again. Sometimes I'd sit by the window with jazz humming low and think about the cleaner I used to be, how scared she was, how determined, how alive. One evening, my son Darius stopped by. We hadn't always been close. Too many years of me working, too little time for us to talk. He looked nervous, standing in the doorway like a boy again. "Mama, can I come in?" I smiled. "Lord, child, this house is half yours. Get in here." We sat in the kitchen sipping lemonade. He kept glancing around, like he was searching for the right words. Finally, he said, "I used to be angry, you know? I thought you loved that company more than us." I stayed quiet. He continued, voice trembling, "But now I see it. You weren't building a company. You were building us a way out. I just didn't understand back then. My throat tightened. Oh, baby, you don't owe me forgiveness. He shook his head. I'm not giving forgiveness. I'm giving thanks. And that's when I broke. Tears rolled down my face as I whispered, You just gave me the one thing I didn't know I needed. He reached across the table and held my hand. I'm proud of you, Mama. That night, after he left, I sat with the quiet and realized something powerful. All the pain, the years of being underestimated, the long nights, the broken hearts, they weren't punishments. They were preparation. Preparation to become the woman who could survive it all, and then teach others to do the same. As summer faded, my body grew weaker, but my spirit was wide awake. I spent my mornings writing letters to the young women I'd mentored. I wanted them to have pieces of my voice when I was gone. One letter read, If life ever tells you you're too small, too old, too late, you tell life to move out your way. Because sometimes, baby, the janitor is the one holding the master key. The day I sealed those envelopes, I felt a strange calm. Not fear, not sadness, just the quiet pride of knowing I had already signed every paycheck that mattered, not with ink, but with legacy. The September air came with the scent of rain and old earth. My doctor said autumn would be hard on my heart, and he wasn't wrong. Some mornings I'd wake up and feel like my body had become a heavy coat I could no longer carry. But my mind was sharper than ever. I used to think strength meant working through pain, showing up, pushing past it. But now, I realized strength could also mean letting go gracefully. The community center I had built with Leah was almost done. It stood on the same block where Jefferson Janitorial once cleaned windows and scrubbed marble floors. Only now, that building had my name etched in gold letters above the door. The Margarita Carter Center for Women's Empowerment. The first time I saw it, I cried quietly in the backseat of my car. The letters shimmered in the afternoon sun, bold, unashamed, mine. Leah wanted to plan a grand opening with reporters and speeches, but I told her, Baby, let's open it with prayer, not press. So, on a soft Sunday morning, we gathered in that place. No cameras, no suits, just women, cleaners, cashiers, nurses, mothers, holding hands in a circle. The room smelled like fresh paint and lavender candles. I sat in the center, my body frail, but my voice steady. Do you know why I built this place? I asked. A young woman near the back, no older than 20, whispered, Because you believed in us. I smiled. No, baby, I built it because I was you. I was tired, broke, invisible. I cleaned their offices, their houses, their sins. And one day, I decided to stop cleaning up their mess and start building my own dream. A hush filled the room. Some women wiped tears. Others nodded quietly, eyes shining. Promise me something, I said softly. Promise me you'll never measure your worth by the job title on your badge, because the world will call you the help, but one day they'll need your help. That day, I gave them my last speech, though none of us knew it yet. That night, Leah stayed at my house. She insisted on making tea while I sat near the window. The moonlight spilled across the rug, silver and still. Miss Carter, she said, bringing the cup over, you ever regret anything? I took a slow sip and smiled faintly. Only the times I stayed quiet when I should have roared. Leah sat across from me, tears forming. You changed my life. I looked at her, this young woman who had once walked into my office trembling, asking for a janitorial job. Now, she was managing the entire foundation. Confident, strong, ready. No, Leah, I said gently. You changed mine. You gave me something to pass it to. That's how legacy works. It don't die. It multiplies. Over the next few weeks, I grew weaker. Walking from one room to another felt like crossing oceans. But I didn't mind. I had learned to savor slowness. Every morning I'd light a candle and whisper a prayer. Lord, thank you for every floor I scrubbed, every tear I cried, every door I walked through. You made me from dust, and I made that dust shine. One evening, Darius and my daughter Naomi came to visit. They brought photos, old ones, of me in my janitor's uniform. I looked at them and laughed. Naomi said softly, "You look so young here, Mama." I was young, but more than that, I was hungry, and that hunger built all this. Darius leaned forward. "Mama, you don't have to worry. Leah told us everything's in order, the center's fully funded. Your name, it'll live forever." I looked at both of them and said, "My name don't matter if y'all forget who I was. I want you to remember the woman who started with a mop and ended with a mission. Remember her, not the marble and gold." They both cried, so did I. That night, when they left, I sat by the window again. Outside, the city hummed, distant cars, laughter, the soft rattle of wind through the trees. I thought of all the versions of me that had existed. The cleaner, the worker, the dreamer, the boss, the teacher. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to be any of them. I was simply Margarita, a woman who had loved, lost, fought, and won. When I finally went to bed, I felt a deep stillness inside me. Not fear, not pain, just peace. In my dream, I was back at Jefferson cleaning. The floors were shining, the city lights reflected in the marble. And as I looked up, I saw my reflection, not tired, not small, but radiant. A voice whispered, "You signed the paycheck, Margarita. You paid your dues in full." I woke up smiling. The morning sun filtered gently through the lace curtains, painting the room in soft gold. The house was quiet, too quiet. Only the faint ticking of the old wall clock filled the silence. Leah sat by Margarita's bedside, her hands wrapped around the older woman's cool, frail fingers. Margarita had passed peacefully in her sleep just before dawn. There was no struggle, no sound, just the calm of a woman who had finished every battle, answered every question life had thrown at her. On her nightstand lay her journal, open to a page that read, "If they ever ask who I was, tell them I built something that lasts longer than pain." Leah couldn't stop the tears. They fell freely, soaking into the journal's pages. For a moment, she imagined Margarita's voice, warm and firm. "Don't cry too long, baby. There's still work to do." And Leah knew she had to keep her promise. 2 weeks later, the Margarita Carter Center for Women's Empowerment reopened its doors. This time, it wasn't for cleaning or training or work. It was for remembrance. The entire city seemed to come alive for the occasion. Reporters lined the block. The mayor sent flowers. Women from every corner of the community came, some who'd once worked beside Margarita, others who had only heard her story. The smell of jasmine filled the air. On the main wall, a giant photo of Margarita was hung, her smiling face framed by her signature head wrap, eyes glowing with quiet pride. Leah stepped up to the podium, clutching a folded piece of paper, Margarita's last note to her. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Many of you knew her as Miss Carter, the woman who started as a cleaner and ended as an empire." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. But to me, she was more than that. She was a teacher, a friend, and a mother when I had none. She once told me, "The floor you're scrubbing today might be the foundation of your future." Leah paused, swallowing hard. And she was right. This building, this dream, it's proof that no beginning is too small to lead to greatness. The audience clapped, some cheering, others wiping their eyes. Then Leah unfolded Margarita's note and read aloud. "To my sisters who feel unseen, I see you. To my daughters who feel unworthy, you are enough. And to the women who think it's too late, it never is." The room stood still. Then, slowly, one by one, women rose to their feet, clapping, not just for the words, but for the life behind them. Outside, as the ceremony ended, a black luxury car pulled up. From it stepped Naomi and Darius, Margarita's children. They had been quiet since the funeral, but today they looked different, composed, strong. Naomi wore a crisp white suit. Darius carried a folder embossed with gold lettering. When Leah approached, they hugged tightly. "Mama always talked about this place," Naomi said softly. "We wanted to show you something." She handed Leah the folder. Inside were the legal papers, transferring the full ownership of the Carter Center Foundation to Leah. Leah froze. I can't take this." Naomi smiled gently. "Mama said you already did. She said you were the only one who understood why she started it, because you lived it." Tears welled in Leah's eyes again. "I'll take care of it, I promise." Darius nodded. That's all she ever asked. Months passed. The center flourished like never before. New programs launched, financial literacy classes, small business mentorships, even scholarships for young single mothers. Every wall carried a story. Photos of women who'd started as janitors, clerks, caretakers, now owning their own businesses, leading their community. Leah's favorite was a mural near the entrance. Margarita standing tall with a mop in one hand and a pen in the other, signing a paycheck. Underneath it, in bold letters, the words she once said, "You clean enough floors, baby, eventually you'll own the building." One late afternoon, Leah sat in the garden behind the center, the same garden Margarita used to tend. The air smelled of wet soil and magnolia blossoms. A group of young girls laughed nearby, taking notes during a mentorship session. Leah smiled, remembering how it all began. One woman with a mop, a dream, and enough courage to believe she deserved more. As the sun dipped low, she whispered, "We're still building, Miss Carter." And somewhere, in the hush between the breeze and the fading light, she could almost hear Margarita's voice, soft and proud. "I know, baby, I know." Epilogue. Years later, the Margarita Carter Foundation had expanded to 3 cities. A documentary was made about her life, From Mop to Mansion, the story of Margarita Carter. Her words became a motto for women across the country. Her story, once whispered in small circles, became a movement. And on what would have been her 70th birthday, Leah stood before a crowd of hundreds, holding a bouquet of white lilies. "This," she said, gesturing to the building behind her, "is what happens when a woman decides she is not defined by where she starts, but by where she refuses to stop." The audience erupted in applause. Somewhere above, clouds parted and a golden beam of sunlight poured through, illuminating Margarita's mural on the wall. The mop, the pen, the name that refused to fade. Margarita Carter.